Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and for the second PMQs in a row, the Prime Minister has been caught out in a lie, or at the very least, a deliberate attempt to mislead the public, because we have to distinguish between our different levels of lies when it comes to Boris Johnson. There was also a spicy little story about his potentially using an earpiece to receive special instructions from Dominic Cummings. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, it's getting to be like this with PMQs now. You have your Prime Minister's questions and, I talk about those. And then there always seems to be some follow-through, like a bit of a bitter aftertaste that emerges over the coming hours and even the following day. So the earpiece stuff to begin with, don't worry, I'm not here to further any conspiracy theories. We'll leave that up to the Brexiteers. But it was amusing as I was trawling through the newspaper report. So what happens when PMQs comes out? I watch that. I usually watch it twice because I'm trying to take notes at the same time. I need to go through a second time usually to get some things. And then I do my report on it. But then I sort of wait and try and find out what the newspapers are saying about it. I'm particularly interested in the right-wing newspapers on this one. There's no real point in trying to see what the Guardian or the Mirror will have to say about the performances. They will obviously always consistently report that Keir Starmer absolutely savaged Boris Johnson yet again. Partly because it's true, but mostly because it fits their agenda. However, savaging a Conservative Prime Minister doesn't suit the agenda of the right-wing press. So, do they have enough material to be able to big up Boris Johnson and make out that he won the debate? No. The best they can do is try and play it as political point scoring on both sides, try and take a neutral stance on it, which is basically a win for Starmer. But there were a couple of things that emerged in the hours after what the right-wing Daily Mail called a bruising affair for Boris Johnson. An accusation, I think probably tongue-in-cheek, that he was taking his cues from Dominic Cummings, because there was a photo circulating of him in Prime Minister's questions close up on the right side of his head. I think they were trying to check if there was a brain in there. With the question, was Boris Johnson wearing an earpiece? Now, I have to say, you look at the photo and you look at it and you go, yeah, okay, it does look like there's something in there pushing out, but you can't actually see anything in there. It's just a chasm. Now, I have to say, yeah, if you were to tell me, does that look a bit weird? I go, yeah, it looks like something's pushing his ear out, but you can't see anything. Ears are weird. I'm not an expert on ears, and I'm certainly not an expert on Boris Johnson's right ear to know if there's anything off about it. And besides, if, as other people have pointed out, if Boris Johnson really was getting covert coaching from Dominic Cummings or anyone else on the other end of an earpiece, didn't really do him any good because his responses were still useless. So I think it's probably safe to put that bit of silliness to bed. But what was interesting is the fact that the Daily Mail were running this. It's a story that ultimately, what are you using this story to do? Belittle the Prime Minister. What does it do? Oh, he has to get secret information in. In other words, he's not up to the task of doing it himself. That is what a report like this is doing. And when you see it in the right-wing press, even if they're not saying, oh yeah, this is true, they're just questioning it, it's belittling the Prime Minister. His authority, even in the right-wing press, is being eroded time after time. And there it is. I mean, if there was anything in his ear, I mean, as my girlfriend pointed out, it might just be a hearing aid. He is getting on a bit, and he does seem to struggle to listen, to be fair. But the more serious issue for me was being caught out lying yet again in Parliament. He did this at the last PMQs 2 weeks ago when he said that the tracing programme would be fully implemented on June the 1st, only for an official government statement to be made later that same day that it would not be ready until the end of June at the earliest. Now, as Starmer noted yesterday, Johnson must have known this when he was making his promises in the House. So why did he make it? But yesterday he also misled Parliament and by obviously extension the public, because Starmer brought up the letter I talked about yesterday, a letter he'd written to the Prime Minister confidentially at the time, offering his help with the reopening of schools. Boris Johnson, Starmer said, didn't reply to the letter. And then when he said this, Johnson became all outraged again. Oh, you're asking me questions. I hate questions. Oh, I rang you up. I telephoned you to respond. Except he hadn't. Not at all. I mean, I said at the time a telephone conversation isn't really good enough because, you write a letter so it's a matter of record. But he hadn't even telephoned. Spokesman later clarified it. Now, I have to say clarified in implied air quotes, because when Downing Street clarifies these things today, what they're basically saying is, yeah, the Prime Minister lied, but this is what he meant. So what they had to confirm was that Boris Johnson had not rung Keir Starmer at all and had not discussed the letter. What Boris Johnson was referring to, apparently, was a conference call with all opposition leaders. In other words, a meeting of opposition leaders. That's not a call to Keir Starmer. That's just a meeting that you were going to go to anyway. And when you didn't discuss this letter, because the letter at the time was still confidential, the other opposition leaders didn't know about it, that wasn't discussed at the meeting either. So one, it wasn't a call to Keir Starmer, and two, it wasn't to discuss the letter. So Keir Starmer hasn't had a response to that letter. But the way they try and clarify, there were other opposition leaders involved. Right, did they talk about the letter then? No. Right, it's nothing to do with the letter then, is it? Yeah. So it's a lie. It's just a lie. So it would appear that Prime Minister's questions is taking on a little bit of a pattern here. So I already discussed yesterday how it seems that Boris Johnson is clearly going to go for the bluff and bluster. Bluff his way through them from now on. Bear in mind that Keir Starmer, as leader of the opposition, has 6 questions he's allowed to put to him. Ian Blackford, as leader of the SNP in Westminster, gets to ask 2 questions. None of those 8 questions, were actually answered by Boris Johnson. And I don't mean not answered to my satisfaction. I mean not answered at all. Even with a nonsense response or a lying response. No response at all. Johnson has no response to clever and relevant questions. He isn't used to facing them. And there's now a darker pattern to these affairs now, because for the second Prime Minister's questions in a row, a government spokesperson has had to immediately contradict something that Boris Johnson has said in Parliament. He's not been punished for it, of course, and so it will continue. But getting away with it in the short term, just lying to get himself, because that's what he's doing. He's approaching these PMQs. I've just got to get through this. I'm going to pick that thread up in a moment. I'm just going to get through this. And it's like he thinks it might help him in the short term, but in the long term he gets caught out. And when even the right-wing press can't big up Johnson's performances, having to acknowledge themselves that he's being battered, and his only response is to get angry and thump his fist on the dispatch box, his performances will get worse, because when Johnson faces Starmer, he is beaten before he's even begun. Because it's not like, I could understand it if he tried to match Starmer. Each week he went, all right, I'm ready this time, I'm ready, I'm going to match him. And he tries to match him, and it falls apart because he's actually not ready. And then he resorts to his bluster. But no, he goes straight for the bluster, as if he has no other tools in his kit. And that, to me, is a very telling mindset, because it means he knows he's beaten before he's even started. He knows he is. He knows he cannot match Starmer, so he just tries delaying tactics. Just get through this. And what it means is, like Ian Duncan Smith, in the noughties when he had to face Tony Blair, when he used to crap himself, is just going there to get through it, get it done, just say things and get out of there and hang the consequences. But the thing is, there are consequences. There are consequences to this. But the worst, in terms of fallout, I suppose, from this was still to come, because the earpiece was amusing, but I wouldn't have thought too many people took it seriously. It was a bit of fun. Having your spokesperson later admit that you lied to MPs, I mean, that should be serious. In the past, what would have happened is the Prime Minister would have had to go back to the House the next day and apologise for inadvertently misleading MPs and go, oh, it's not really what I meant. What I meant was this. But to apologise anyway. No, not Boris Johnson. Not these days. No, Boris Johnson is special. Of course, it's the sort of special as would be used by a mother, as opposed to the more laudable meaning of the word, but special nonetheless. But during proceedings, Boris Johnson at one point said how proud he was of the government's record, its achievements during the coronavirus pandemic. So BBC Newsnight ran with this yesterday. They played the clip of him saying that and then noted that we had the worst record on the pandemic in Europe and most of the world. In fact, we now have more daily COVID deaths than the entire EU combined. The entire EU combined. And the presenter, Emily Maitlis, who was revered and reviled in equal measure last week, said this: "When it comes to excess deaths, Britain's currently a world leader. Is that really something to be proud of?" And it was a theme taken on in a number of quarters, of course, and made the front page of the Mirror. We've just hit 50,000 official deaths from COVID if you take the whole UK. The real number, of course, is believed to be higher by the Office for National Statistics. But even that total, even the official figure, is much higher than anywhere else in Europe. And there's only really the United States to beat us on that, but per capita, we beat them. And it can't be pointed out enough. We had two massive advantages over developed nations. Massive advantages. First of all, we had more time than most to prepare for this. We could see what was happening in other countries elsewhere, and we could have acted, we could have avoided the same mistakes they made. Because all countries made mistakes, we still would have made mistakes, honest mistakes. But we made mistakes deliberately. We didn't look at what was happening elsewhere and take appropriate action. Second thing is, we're an island. We're a bloody island. Port health is relatively easy for us, and yet we conducted no checks on people travelling into the country at all. Not one. And there it is. And each week it just seems to me that PMQs is just going to get worse and worse for Boris Johnson. He's going to be... There's no way Parliament's going to not break up for summer. He won't allow it because he doesn't fancy mauling through summer as well. So we'll be going through like this for another month and a half. Then he'll have his summer break off. Then he'll be back in September to face it again. And I just wonder how long the Conservative MPs can keep him before he's doing permanent damage to them. But there it is. That's my second reading of this time the fallout of PMQs. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.